Hello, and welcome to Keeping It Real, the podcast where we talk to the best, coolest, most interesting people in real estate. And we got a good one for you today. So I'll introduce him here in a second, Pree. But we met at a Young Realtors of Austin event. It was a great charity event a few weeks back. And there's all these guys like coming up to talk to Pree and saying that, loved his work and wanting to get information. So I thought to myself, all right, we got to have this guy on the podcast. And here we are. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Chris, first of all, you're too kind. Thank you. And hey, everybody, Pree Poonati here from the Art of Nirvana. And I'm pretty much a stress and anxiety coach for the real estate industry. And once I kind of told Chris about that, he was like, yes, these are stressful times. Let's get you on the podcast. So basically today, I think we're just going to talk about what causes us stress, what to do about it, and how you can be non-stressful even in a stressful market, because there are other things that you can focus on. So that's pretty much it, Chris.
I'm going to love this topic. So obviously, if you're a, kind of type A personality, like a lot of real estate agents are, they want to like drive their numbers and, obviously live in a commission-based business. The Fed doing things that causes buyers to not want to buy, can cause some serious anxiety. And so maybe I'll just open it up by saying like, what's the vibe on the street right now? Like, what have you been hearing people like worrying about?
Yeah, great question. I think the vibe is people are scared only because we're so used to instant gratification. And when things are going really well, we get used to things, right? Like homes on the market didn't even last. It sounds like for a minute, right? Before pre-COVID, right? Like they were selling out like that. Now people
You
have
and
to
I should add some context that we're both in Austin, which was like one of the most superheated markets with crazy, absolutely crazy stuff happening.
Yeah, it was insane. But now it's like realtors have to do their open houses again, and like mortgage people have to start prospecting with realtors because they can't rely on refinancing. So it's a very interesting market shift, but all people know that nothing good lasts forever. Just like on the flip side, nothing bad lasts forever either. It's just the way that you can accommodate to varying market conditions that will keep you even keel. But no matter what, the one thing that shouldn't change is like the way you prospect, the way you conduct business. Shouldn't matter if the market's super hot or if the market is super cold. Your procedures and your processes should be the same. So that's the word on the street, Chris.
There we go. So we're it's funny. It's like ostensibly a stress and anxiety focused podcast, and we're already talking about like process, procedures, prospecting. Exactly right up our alley here. So yeah, might be useful maybe to give a little bit of background on like the corner of the industry that you're in, and maybe a little bit about your coaching practice, just to give people like perspective on like how you're seeing everything.
Sure. Well, let me go ahead and give you a background first, because I know I don't really do a good job of that. So I went to Purdue University and I graduated with a management degree in 2007. And then I got into finance. I was working for Schwab. And then I moved to Chicago in 2008. And I don't know if you remember what happened in 2008, but it was pretty
Oh
crazy.
yeah.
I was a cold calling stockbroker then, and it was not pretty. But what I realized was that I was interested in finance and accounting. So I went back home to Syracuse, New York, which is where I'm from. I got my master's in finance and I got my master's in accounting. And then I worked for Ernst and Young. And I was like, this isn't it. This isn't it. Because at Ernst and Young, I was working anywhere from 80 to 120 hours a week. I didn't know if I was awake or if I was asleep when I was working. Like I had no idea what was going on. And then I realized I was like, okay, I gotta shift my focus into doing things that I love, into doing things that will provide fulfillment. So that's when I transitioned into being a gym owner. So I got my nutrition certification, my personal training certification, my yoga certification, my meditation certification. And I moved to Austin to open up my gym called Nirvana Gym. And I had that running for about 5 years, but luckily I shut it down 3 months before COVID. Not because I'm a psychic, but because what I realized was that the people were using the gym as an excuse, as a coping mechanism to not do the work at home. And then it dawned upon me that, okay, I got to help people with developing healthy habits, understanding their patterns of behaviors, and putting them in a position to succeed. So with that being said, basically what I'm doing in the real estate market right now is I'm just helping realtors understand if what they're doing is working. Because a lot of us, whether we want to admit it or not, we tend to live in delusion. We think that, well, if we keep doing the same thing, that we're going to catch a big break. But even though in the back of our mind, we know Einstein's definition of insanity by heart, right? But we'll still keep pushing against the grain and hoping something will change. But the reality of the situation is like, there are a lot of skills, a lot of processes, just a lot of things that we have to develop that we still haven't developed yet. I mean, even the most successful people are always learning, whether they're 50, 60, 70, or 80. So just because we think we have something down like that, that doesn't mean that we can just rest on those laurels. It means that we need to keep changing. We need to keep evolving. We need to keep growing. So that way, when we bring more to the table, it's like, wow, it's like this realtor or this mortgage lender or this title person really knows what's going on. So basically the crux of my coaching is really helping people identifying who they are, what their values are, why they're in real estate. Yeah, it's to help people, but we can help people doing things outside of real estate. If we're being frank, we want money, right? Because real estate produces the most millionaires out of any industry. So we don't go into real estate just to be broke. We go into real estate to actually make a living for ourselves and to live a lifestyle that we want to live. So besides our purpose, besides our values, we understand, where are we getting distracted? What are we avoiding? What's that one difficult task that we have to do? How do we feel when we can create balance in our everyday life instead of being a puppet with like the home buyers or the mortgage lenders or the title people? So there's so many factors that are in place here that we're either being delusional about, not understanding, not acknowledging, or just being completely oblivious to it. And when we do that, what happens is we get really stressed and anxious, Chris. We get really stressed and anxious. So that's where I come in.
There's a lot in there that I want to drill into. So,
Absolutely.
okay, I'm trying to decide where to start. So I think the like, maybe this is a core productivity tip. I'm interested in what your perspective on, like, and I think it's going to take us several questions to get there. Like, what the core of like what you see is driving a lot of stress and anxiety for people. But before we like really kind of dive into that, I am very curious about the essentially the procrastination, especially like you said, using gym as, or like exercise as like a, I don't know, is it procrastination or is it a cover up? And I say that thinking about my workout in 3 hours here. So
right. Okay, so basically what you're asking, if I'm understanding, is what's the cover up of like, why do people go to the gym? Is that correct? Or
well, yeah, like I guess talk to me about like the procrastination that people are doing, where it's like, that you should be doing something else, or maybe you don't, but you're working on something else that feels productive.
Oh, you're talking about creative procrastination.
Yeah, there we go.
Yes. So there's always one difficult task that we have to do that keeps us up at night, that we're like, man, we should be doing more of this, right? So but but because that difficult task is so difficult and it requires like mental energy, physical energy, it could lead to overwhelm, it could lead to a greater success of failure initially. We feel a lot more comfortable to kind of pivot away from that and doing something that we'll win at. And the crux of being human is to win, is to meet our expectations. Because ever since we were younger, we've had such unrealistic expectations based off maybe family pressures, maybe societal pressures, internal pressures. And then when we keep failing, then what happens is we need to do something to win. And this is where like people get a quick dopamine hit, right? Like the social media browsing, the Netflix binging. It's like, okay, I'm winning here because I'm excited and I feel that I'm progressing instead of feeling down and sad, because as human beings, we want to be happy, right? Like that's our natural state. We want to be at peace. So sorry, that was a little bit of a background, but what happened at the gym is like people know they have to work out every day or at least 3 to 5 times a week. But what happens is we haven't developed that muscle, that skill set to actually do that. So what happens is like, hey, you know what? I'm really stressed out today. I'm going to go do my yoga class. But what it should be, it's like, hey, I'm really stressed out today. I'm going to practice my yoga at home because I know it helps me decrease my stress. And when I get to see my yoga teacher or go to my yoga class next week, I get to brag to him or her about like, hey, how much I'm progressing either with my flexibility or with my strength or with my core. And then what happens is like that yoga, that stretching, that workout, it gets ingrained within us where it really allows us to strengthen any cause of stress that we might not have been able to accommodate before. And that's only one aspect, right? So then there's like money too, right? The financial aspect. If it's prospecting, if it's making 10 cold calls or 10 cold outreaches or 10 direct messages, what we want ideally and our expectation is like, I'm going to reach out to 10, I'm going to close to 5, I'm going to make $50,000 today, and it's going to be an easy month. But it doesn't happen that way. It never does, and it never has. So the quicker we can move out of that mindset that, hey, I'm going to be in love with the journey, I'm going to be in love with the process, and the outcome is the cherry on top. It's the icing on the cake, not the actual cake. So if we can shift our mindset to that way, then what happens is we get addicted to the process, we get addicted to the journey, and then we get to reap the fruits of our labor by actually doing the consistent work. Did I answer your question, Chris?
I think so. In kind of like you're like almost going straight in for the kill, because it sounds like there's two things. Uh, it's intentionally choosing the things that you work on to get the right outcome. So
Yes.
it's not I go to yoga because I think that that's going to be good for me. It's I'm going to yoga to work on these series of you know I don't want to say deficiencies, but things you want to get better at. Yeah, it's like you go to the gym because you want to get better at a certain number of things, versus just going and spending an hour on the treadmill for unknown reasons.
Right.
Same thing, like you would prospect or reconnect with old clients, or do everything that you need to do in your real estate business because you are driving to an outcome, not because it's a checkbox type thing that you just want to get done so you can be done for the day. That's kind of like one of the parts that I identified there.
Yeah, and like a good summary of that is if you're checking off check boxes, you're checking out. Don't check out to check the check boxes, right? Like be in it, and then the check boxes will automatically get checked off, and you'll be like, okay, this is good. It's like I'm making progress. And just know that things always take longer than you anticipate. It it sucks, but it is what it is.
I feel like there's a strong overlap between what you're saying here and what I've heard some of our other coaches say. And
Yeah.
it's like, if I know that I need to make, 10 cold calls today,
Mhm.
and I'm just working down the list, and, someone answers the phone, but I'm already thinking about the next person because that's the next thing on my check marks. I'm not really tuned into what they're saying and trying to figure out how to deliver value for them. I'm just kind of like going through the motions, and it seems like if you're going through the motions, you're just going to get the mediocre results.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And that goes into just being present, right? Being present in everything that we do. We don't need to text while we watch a movie, while we cook dinner, while we're trying to play some relaxing music, as we turn on the water to get into a hot bubble bath. Like, we don't need to do all of that, you know?
I am so guilty of all of that. I am like always triple tasking uh, all the time.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So it seems like then like a cause of anxiety for people is because they don't, maybe subconsciously they don't feel the connection between where they want to be and where they are now, and they're just working that to-do list. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. What I like to say to people is if we don't have a purpose or a mission, we're like a dog chasing its own tail.
Mm.
And my basic framework, which I think makes so much sense, is as a human being, you find out what your values are. Once you know what your values are, you instill those values, and that leads to what your purpose is. Once you know what your values and your purpose are, now you have the clarity. Clarity is key because we're not clear a lot because we're just kind of going through the motions, right? Once you have the clarity, then you can take conscious action to live a life of fulfillment. If any one of those 5 things are missing, it's like trying to make a fantastic meal but are missing ingredients or for the recipe. So we need to have all 5 of those in place. And what happens is we get so motivated by the next cool thing, the next big and upcoming thing, and we get into it. But then when it loses its luster, it loses its appeal, then we're kind of back to, all right, got to find something else to lift me up. But if we have our purpose and our values driving us, then those distractions kind of go away and we can focus on what we need to do. And once we reach where we want to get into, then maybe we can tap into those distractions if they're healthy for us to grow our business, to grow ourselves personally, spiritually, mentally, physically, any of the leads, right? It's just that we have to reach a certain point, go through the obstacles, the challenges, and develop that willpower, develop that stamina to overcome challenges. And then we're really proud of ourselves. We feel really good about ourselves instead of fakingly or superficially feeling good about ourselves, you know?
So how does this conversation go when you're talking to a new client and they're like, I'm stressed out? And you ask, why are you here? Like not in the here sense, like I understand you're stressed out, but like, why are you in this industry? Do they like instantly have an existential crisis and freak out? Or like, how do you walk people through that to get that answer? Or do they usually have the answer in their head and it's like really, really fast? They know the answer and just need to be reminded.
Well, as you said earlier, I try not to go for the kill right away. I try to kind of soften them up a little bit. But I'll ask them, it's like, okay, what's causing you stress and anxiety? And most of the time, it's either finances, it's their health, or maybe it's their relationships. It's usually one of those 3. And I'm like, okay, cool. What are you doing about it? And Chris, if we're keeping it real,
we're keeping it real.
Podcast. Everybody knows what they have to do. You know, they just want to hear a response from somebody else to invalidate that because they know how hard it is to do that thing that they don't want to do. And where I come in is I keep it real with them. I was like, listen, yes, I get it. It sucks. It's not fun. I understand your predicament. But we have 2 options. We can continue on the same path that we're continuing on, or we can try to make incremental changes. Or we can try to make monumental changes. If we make monumental changes, we'll get better results quicker. But that's going to lead to potentially more overwhelm, potentially higher expectations that could lead to a bigger and greater crash and burn. But if we make the incremental changes, then we can start building those habits. It's about building those habits around what we need to do. And I'll get into that a little bit later because there's a juicy nugget that I want to kind of spill in this podcast. But
Oh, I feel like we should just go there now. Like, and I was, well, maybe this is where you were headed, but I was going to direct you to like, what do those breakdowns, because we like to give people like really tactical stuff. And so far we've said, you know, your to-do list is causing you anxiety, which they probably already know. And you should gaze within to figure out why you're here on Earth. So maybe let's fill in the middle parts here and say, like, what do you encourage people to do, like, on a weekly or daily, weekly, monthly, annual type basis? Like, how does this layer up for you?
okay, love it. Not exactly the juicy part that I was getting into, but I will get into that in a bit. So what I tell people, what is super important from what I learned from experience and seeing other people do, is we have 3 states that we have to nourish every day. That's our physical state, our mental state, and our spiritual state. If one of those states or 2 of those states or 3 of those states aren't being fulfilled, then what happens is our ego and our soul clash, because we have an expectation of who we want to be in maybe 3 months, 6 months, a year, 3 years. Some of us want to be really fit, but we can't be fit because we're eating unhealthy, because we're working 80 hours a day, because we're unproductive in the way that we work. And as a result, we get stressed, and a coping mechanism is eating sugar. So we're not losing weight and we hate ourselves for it. Like the mental, right? It's like we have to understand where we're failing and where we're succeeding. If we're not taking count of what's working and what's not working, then it's like just blindly guessing, right? Like we have to take data, because data gives us power. It allows us to be more efficient in what we do. And then the spiritual sense is kind of what I talked about earlier, the purpose and the values. If we're just doing this blindly because we have no mission, then we're a robot. Like there has to be a mission of like why we're trying to sell more houses or make more money, or maybe it's get people off the street if we're trying to help like homelessness. And then that is our reminding factor. It's like, hey, Pree, I know today's a tough day, but remember, this is your mission. You're doing this not for you, for other people, or you're trying to make this much amount of money so you can give back to the community, or so you can finally go on that vacation that you've been wanting to go to, because you keep denying yourself of it because you don't believe that you are worth it. So it's really, Chris, to nourish the physical, the mental, and the spiritual on a daily basis. Because if we don't do that, we're just going into deep psychological warfare. And that's what leads to stress, to anxiety, for people giving up, which leads to depression, and then maybe potentially even suicide. So sorry, that got really deep.
No, it's good. And I think it's this is interesting because I wonder, do you think that maybe a younger generation of professionals that's now kind of entering the prime of their career is more in touch with this? Because I know I certainly observed a lot of my mentors, just, I mean, stone cold killers, but there's always a cost, and frequently it seemed like the cost was health. Um, or like you said, relationships or stuff like that. So do you think people are becoming more like attuned to that? I mean, maybe what, your people relations people call like, work-life balance type situation? Or do you think it's still something that like, Americans just come installed with default firmware of like work hard, and we need to be like trained on how to take care of ourselves?
I don't know the answer to that question, but if I'm going to guess, I'm going to say that they might be a little bit better at it, but they have their whole other whirlwind to deal with, and that's social media and like instant gratification and instant validation. So going back to what you were saying, is to develop work-life balance, and I'm going to use this number specifically. If we Most people's default method of thinking is, if I make $100,000, I'm happy. And then their next goal might be to make $1 million. But the fault in that is they try to make $1 million right away. And what happens is those areas that are still malnourished, like let's say your physical and your mental and your spiritual, but your financial is nourished, those three states are still going to be malnourished. So the way to create work-life balance is, if you make $100,000, you pause on scaling up and you use that money to bring up the mental pillar, the physical pillar, and the spiritual pillar. So it's at a higher baseline. Then once it reaches a higher baseline, then you go back to the financial pillar and scale up to 1 million, and then you lift those pillars up again. But what happens is, most people, once they make a certain amount of money, it's like, this feels good. They'll keep striving to get that pillar as high as possible. And then what happens is you have an uneven foundation. And when you have an uneven foundation, you yourself are uneasy. You're not on stable ground. You're always sliding emotionally or physically or mentally. And then what happens is you start to become restless. And then you're like, life is not working. I have all this money, but I still feel unfulfilled. And the longer you go about not nourishing those states, the harder it becomes, because the more ingrained you are in terms of being that person who chases money, for example. So, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds a lot like, on the business front, we call that like scalable growth, and you can think of millions of case studies of businesses that grew too fast and their core infrastructure couldn't keep up. And I've certainly seen that with people. I think the more interesting case studies are the people that have achieved like that next level and went, oh, this isn't working for me. And they scaled back down because they got to the end goal and they're like, no, I wasn't in love with it, or it was hurting me, or, that kind of decision, which I always really respect those people, because it's a lot of like deep self-awareness.
Yeah, likewise. And I think like those are the people that are like, okay, that worked, but I still don't feel fulfilled. I mean, there's a reason why celebrities have committed suicide. They have all the fame, they have all the validation, they have all the money, but the thing that they're lacking, that is the most true essence of what we need as human beings, is internal peace. And if we're not developing internal peace, then we're just running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to figure things out. And I'm trying to tell people, it's like, you can figure this out. You just need to actually work on it instead of trying to avoid it and overcompensate in other areas, instead of not spending enough time on internal peace.
So if someone's listening to this and says, oh yeah, it sounds like me. It sounds like, my to-do list is driving me, not the other way around, like I'm not having a good time right now. Like, what is that first step to starting to look at your days and go and figure out how it can serve you instead of the other way around?
Sure. So it's to journal. We need to get the stuff out of our head and onto paper. Because the way I view our mind is like this glass of water. Well, it's not a glass of water, it's just a glass. But you fill it up with water, and water in this case symbolizes your memories, your attachments, your emotions, etc., etc. And what happens is you keep pouring and it keeps overflowing. And then what happens is, if you don't ever clean the cup out, then you're just going to keep running over, and then you can't ever think clearly because your cup is always full. But journaling allows you to empty out your cup. And when you can empty out your cup, then you can think clearly. And I will give you a real life example. Chris, am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Well, you could just do it, and Sean can either beep it or we'll cut it. It doesn't matter. So I say you be you.
It's okay. I won't swear. We'll make it easier for Sean. So, Chris, sometimes when I journal, I start out saying, "Pree, you are the biggest piece of crap in the world." I was like, "Okay, cool. Why do you feel that way?" Well, I feel that way because I didn't get to work out and I didn't get to meditate as much as I wanted to last week. It's like, okay, cool. Why is that important to you, Pree? And, I'll literally have a dialogue with myself. And it'll be like, well, it's important to me because when I do work out and when I do meditate, I feel that I can take deeper breaths. I feel more at peace. I feel less rushed and I just feel more relaxed. It's like, okay, cool. Those are important. I agree. So, what's the problem? How can you go ahead? Or it sounds like this is important to you. So, how are we going to change to make this a priority? Well, I have been spending a lot of time of just driving and a lot of time networking. Okay, cool. So, would it be fair to say that, you could maybe do 1 to 2 less networking events a week so you can spend more time, working out and meditating? Yeah, I can do that. Okay, cool. Right there. It's like I got my answer right there just from journaling and just figuring out like what's causing the problem. And then I figured out the solution. Now, this might be controversial, but I feel that everybody should see a therapist. I think it's super important, but I think it's very unhealthy to be relying on a therapist.
Hmm. That's a nuanced take.
Yeah. Because journaling also helps you develop the therapist within, but seeing a therapist will allow you to understand and maybe open up some blockages or some blind spots that you haven't been able to see. And that might get you more open to journaling. But journaling, for the most part, will help you develop the therapist within. And if you realize that you have a deep addiction or you have a deep problem that you yourself can't solve because you tried to solve it, then journaling will give you permission to be like, you know what, I think it's time to see a specialist to kind of get this figured out. But if you're relying on your therapist where you're trying to call them at 2 a.m, oh my God, I'm having a panic, I'm having a panic attack, and like, I don't know what to do. My girlfriend broke up with me, my boyfriend broke up with me, and like the world's coming to an end. Then it's like we haven't developed those skills to help ourselves overcome obstacles. So journaling is the number one thing that will kind of clear your mind and give you a clean slate to think clearly.
I like it. I was trying to think if I've heard exactly that advice before. And it's similar to, I mean, like the way that I deal with, like, if I can't sleep, then it's usually I need to, what I think of, maybe it's just being a technology guy. I think of the brain a little bit more like a computer. And it's like, I got to clear the memory. Like, I got to get it all out. I got to put it somewhere where I can think about it later so that I can focus on what I need to do now, which is sleep. And so I need to, write that all down. Okay. So here's a question for you.
Yes.
Journaling.
Yes.
All right. By hand or digitally?
I personally prefer by hand because when you journal by hand, you can really allow the emotions to kind of go from your head all the way down to your arm, to your fingertips, to the pen, to the paper. And it's just more of like an ethereal experience compared to doing technology. It might be faster, but when you handwrite, you can't escape that emotion as quickly compared to writing it out. It's like you actually have to write out, "You are a piece of crap," instead of saying, "You are a piece of crap," period, exclamation point, right?
Yep.
So I don't know the science behind it, but it makes such a huge difference if you do it by paper. And it might help you back with your cursive in case you forgot how to write cursive. No, I did.
Well, I'm going to second you on the by hand thing. That makes sense to me. And based off another data point, which I have, which is I take notes by hand. So even though I am always using Apple Notes and Google Docs and, documenting, like way faster typist than handwritten, but it's, if I want to cement something in my mind, especially during interpersonal interactions like this, writing it out, there's something about that like reaches a deeper level you know, in the gray matter than anything else. So,
Chris, can I share a secret with you?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
So last July, just by journaling, I created 3 courses. And the caveat was that I needed to be back home in Syracuse to actually do that, because like in Austin right now I'm too distracted with all these networking events and like the business and like other auxiliary opportunities. But when I'm home, I don't have any of those distractions. And remember that juicy nugget that I was going to tell you about?
I was waiting for it.
We're going to go ahead and get into it. The easiest way to alleviate stress and anxiety is not to accumulate, but to eliminate.
Hmm.
Eliminate your distractions. Eliminate your attachment to things that no longer serve you. Eliminate material possessions that no longer serve you. The less the less thinking this has to do, the more space that you can create for clarity, for creativity, for openness, for learning. Could be anything. But the more we eliminate and the more we reduce, then the more space that we create. Just like what you said earlier, it's like memory and RAM. If your RAM is all full all the way, your computer is slow as heck. But if it's not,
So I like this because it's like, you know, you can go anywhere on the internet, Apple Podcasts, you know, YouTube, and you can find the life hack podcasts, and they're going to tell you, you know, top 10 things that you should start doing, you know, to make your life better.
yeah,
And you have a reductionist approach, which is think about the things that are not serving you and get rid of them.
yeah.
Simple.
I mean, it's so simple, but it's harder to do because the brain gets excited about new things, right? Like we get excited about maybe buying a new pair of shoes, then getting rid of old gym shoes that we've had for 15 years that we've had nostalgia to, right? Although for some people, it's about as challenging to get rid of that as it is to buy something new. But when we can eliminate, as I said earlier, it just opens up more room. And it might sound crazy, but try it, see what happens, and reach out to me or Chris because I'd love to hear your experience of growth through elimination, not through accumulation.
Definitely. Okay, so I want to circle us back around to kind of the title of the episode.
Okay.
So, uh, the market shifts, things change, people come to you and say, "I'm feeling it." How are you approaching that conversation? What are you walking them through?
So I'm asking them, where are you feeling it? Are you feeling it financially? Are you feeling it in terms of there's just not enough to do and you're bored? It's like, what is the cause? And for most people, it's financially. It's like, okay, cool. So you have an expectation that you want to make this much amount of money, but because of the market condition, you can't make this much amount of money. So God has been really kind with us with this Austin real estate market in terms of the amount of opportunities that we can buy or sell houses, right? Now, God has taken that away from us. So now that you've been spoon fed, how are you going to create your own way of getting business? What are you doing outside the box? Everybody mostly does the same thing. Are you going to do the same thing or are you going to stick out and do something different? I could have been a life coach, but there's a bajillion life coaches out there. I chose to label myself as a performance coach or a stress and anxiety coach, a performance coach for corporations, a stress and anxiety coach for individuals. Because if I say that I'm a stress and anxiety coach, you're like, oh, cool. What's that? What does that look like? If I say that I'm a life coach, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, no thanks. Right. So just because I made that little shift, I created intrigue to see if people thought that I'm a good fit for them. So with you realtors, or mortgage people or title people, what are you doing to stick out? You're in a very crowded market. If you're not differentiating yourself from other people, then the only thing that people have to go on is if they know you personally. And if you're not networking and building those relationships because you're too scared, now you're behind 2 8 balls. So get out of your nest, write, create, journal, figure out ways that you can stand out more. And it's not that you have better customer service or that you can close deals faster or that you work around the clock, because every real estate, mortgage, or title person uses that. Think about ways that you can become more creative. Maybe that's stepping outside of Austin. Maybe that's going to Dallas, Waco. Maybe it's going to Montana. Maybe it's going to North Carolina, Oklahoma. It doesn't matter. It's convenient to stay here, hypothetically, because we live here and all our resources are here. But if there's opportunities somewhere else that we can capitalize on, what's the worst that can happen if you go to another marketplace, capitalize, and then come back when this market changes? Nobody's going to say anything. And if anything, your bank and your money and your bank balance is going to be more happy, right? And then you're going to be more happy. So think about what you can do outside the box to stand out. That is for financially. Like if you're doing well financially, now's a perfect time to get clear on your operations, on your processes, on your organizations. How can you be more efficient? Could you utilize better technology to expedite the closing process or the lending process or the title process? It doesn't matter what it is, but just like how life is cyclical, with opportunities for growth and expansion and opportunities for reflection and implementation, it's the same thing with any market. Utilize the time that's provided for you to work on your weaknesses. Just like how we talked about those pillars, the financial pillar, the mental, physical, and spiritual pillar. Now's a good time to maybe focus on the mental, the health, maybe the physical, the mental, which could be organization and journaling, the spiritual, which could really get you clear on, why am I a real estate agent? Why am I a mortgage lender? Why am I entitled? Am I only in it for the money, or is it because I want to live a lifestyle where I can not only provide to myself and my family, but to other people as well? So very long answer, but that's what I would advise them on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and a couple of those pieces like resonated with the way that I think about the problem. So, as a career marketer, there's a book called Differentiate or Die, which is, man, we keep airing towards the dark here. We gotta keep it friendly, but basically it says exactly what you said, which is, you need to be different than your competition for you to really stick in a consumer's mind. For you to really capitalize, on your target market. And especially if you're running an established business, or you have a certain way of doing those things, it can be hard to step outside, the current mode and, try something new, to bend the organization, to break your processes, that kind of thing. And, obviously be careful, but at the same time, you're not going to find out if there's more money to be made in another niche without going and giving it a taste, right?
Yeah, it's exactly the Blockbuster and Netflix model. Like Blockbuster chose not to adapt, and it went bankrupt. Mm-hmm. And a key point to take away from this topic is life is all about phases. Your friendships. Some of your best friends, might have been in elementary school, but you're no longer speaking with them, or they could have been in college and you're no longer speaking with them. It's just a phase of life. What's worked in the past doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to work in the future if you repeat it. But what does happen is if you have that open mind to experiment without being attached to the result, but actually giving it your all, then who knows what'll happen. But the thing is that if you experiment, you can't view that as failure. The way to view it is like, okay, I experimented, I learned, I know this works, I know that doesn't work, I know part of this works, I know part of that doesn't work. So I'm going to combine what works in terms of creating whatever you want to create. Don't get attached to a process that might have worked before that might not be working now. Now, maybe in another bull market, that process that you used to make thousands of dollars might work again, but it's not going to work in this market. So now you have a positive bull market strategy. But do you have a positive bear market strategy? And if you don't, now's a perfect time to figure that out, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I want to talk about this for a little bit too, because, we just got back from our unofficial user conference, right? And so, a lot of like awesome realtors there that can kill it in any market. And so the things that you see among that group of people is, you know, the the certainty that they'll be able to make money in any market condition. Maybe not as much money,
Yeah.
but they'll be able to do it. They know how to adapt, and largely because they've seen it before, and they're
Right.
connected with other people that can help them get there. So that's that mastermind component. Like
Yeah.
connect with the been there, done that people that can, give you ideas or mentorship through it. Um,
And
the
Chris, just adding on to that real quick is a lot of millionaires and billionaires make their money in like bear markets and like
Mhm.
recession proof markets, right? Because like the cost of buying things are a lot lower than what they'd normally be in a bull market. So there's opportunity if you can figure out how to do it and learn and actually do it, even if you fail. And the next
Absolutely.
and the next step is to find mentors, right? That have actually done it
Right.
before. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I really liked you mentioned was, okay, so if you're in a place where finances is not the top concern, like let's look at the operation and let's see how things can be improved there. Um, we heard so much of that, where it's like during the crazy frenzy, of the last couple of years, we weren't able to take the time to build out an operation that scaled. Well,
Right.
now the Fed provided that opportunity for you, and so you can figure out how to get a scalable business together so that when it takes off again, it will be in a more like growth friendly position.
Yeah, I love it. And it's so important because, as you mentioned earlier, some of these companies scale too quickly and they didn't have the proper operations and they buckle down, you know?
Yeah,
So don't be
yeah,
one of those companies.
absolutely. And I mean, if I'm capping off like my list of advice, it's stay growth focused, even if the market's coming down. Like I certainly look at that. It's like, okay, maybe the growth percentages are not what they want them to be, but maybe your market share, that you're able to take can go up during this period.
Yeah,
If you're able to get stronger when other people are finding it difficult, like when that market turns around, you're going to be in an excellent position.
absolutely. And it's kind of piggybacking off what you said is I had a mortgage company hire me for 3 months to do performance coaching. And he had two loan officers that he was having trouble with.
Mhm.
And I evaluated them for about 2.5, 3 months. And I was like, I told the branch managers, like, these guys aren't going to change. So you have two options. You can continue to invest in something or in someone that does not want to do the work or believe in what you're doing, or you can withdraw your energy, your time, and your resources from them and focus on yourself and growing other parts of the business company. And when he did that, he closed 12 deals all by himself in July and 9 deals in August, which is that's when the interest rates were going up. So it is amazing what you can do when you don't spend energy on people or things that aren't going to serve you. If you spend time and energy on things that you know work, that you've replicated in the past. But the thing with him is that was an ego hit because as a
Mhm.
branch manager, he's like, I want to make sure that I have everybody functioning at the highest level. But it's that whole bringing the horse to the water analogy. You can bring all the horses to the water, but some of them are going to drink it, some of them aren't going to drink it. You can't force the horse to drink the water. The timing has to be right for that person. And sometimes, if you do let these people go, or maybe take away their draw or commission or whatever, it might motivate them to be like, you know what? I really need to get it together, or I might need to leave and find something more stable because I am not in that position yet where I can be a successful salesperson in this market. And that's okay. Like, nobody is judging you. And another key takeaway that I want you to take from this podcast is we are all born with different strengths. My huge strength is like relationships. I'm very good at connecting with people. Some people are so good at finances. Some people are really good at their health and wellness, right? Like these bodybuilders or these people that always have a six pack, or, you know, these women that are always toned. It doesn't matter what people have. What does matter is if you aspire to be like them, then you learn from them if they're willing to accept you. And then you can grow that weakness into a strength, just like how you can offer your strength to other people that might be weak in those areas. You shouldn't judge what you have and what you don't have compared to what other people have, because they're thinking the same thing. They're like, oh, I wish I was good at relationships, or I wish I was good at finances. It doesn't matter. We're all born with different strengths, and it's good to keep growing that strength, but what's going to be far more effective is growing those weaknesses.
Love it. I think we should end it right there. That's awesome. Where can people find you?
People can find me at the IG at the Art of Nirvana. You can also find me on LinkedIn under Pree Poonati. That's P like Paul, R-E-E. Last name is P like Paul, O-O-N-A-T-I. If you're a business, I prefer you connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can talk about potential corporate workshops. If you're a small business professional or just a person that's seeking stress and anxiety relief, then you can hit me up on Instagram and we can do a free consultation to see if this would be a good fit for you. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Well, hopefully you enjoyed that. Keeping a Real episode with Pree. Make sure that you go to Apple iTunes and hit that, it's not iTunes anymore. It's Apple Podcast. Man, that's old muscle memory. Should reduce that. Hit the subscribe button. Leave us a review if you enjoyed it. Also, we're growing our YouTube channel. Lots of good stuff being posted there. So if you go to YouTube and type in Real Geeks, you'll find the channel.